A leader recently told me that their team had a communication problem. No one would speak up in meetings anymore. When they asked for feedback, people would just stare at their laptops. When they would ask if anyone had concerns, people would just stay silent. If they asked if people agreed, everyone would nod and then the meeting would end. But then a few hours later, they would hear concerns secondhand. Someone would mention that staff are frustrated. Someone else references a conversation that they had to decide after the meeting. Eventually, the leader realized that people had opinions. They just weren't comfortable sharing them in the room. This person came to me wanting to know how they could get their team to communicate more effectively. But I wasn't thinking about communication skills. I was thinking about trust. My name is David Ryan Barcega Castro-Harris, all five names for all the ancestors, and this is Conflict Reveals Culture, a podcast about the tensions, frustrations, and conflicts that show up inside organizations and what they reveal about the culture we've built. From the leader's perspective, the challenge is straightforward. Important information isn't reaching decision makers. Concerns stay hidden until they become bigger problems. Disagreements are happening after meetings instead of during them. And the leader feels like they're trying to create opportunities for feedback, but no one is taking them. At this point, the leader might start to wonder, do people even care? Are they disengaged? Do they lack confidence? And then they start looking for solutions. Maybe the team needs communication training. Maybe meetings need a different structure. Maybe they should be more interactive. Maybe they should incorporate more team building activities. Maybe they should call on people individually. Maybe people need to be reminded that feedback is genuinely welcome. Those responses would make sense if the actual issue was communication and the observable behavior is real. People are staying quiet. But the challenge is that observable behavior doesn't tell us why something is happening. And when we jump too quickly into problem solving, we often miss the deeper pattern underneath it. I've worked with enough organizations to understand that people rarely stop talking. They just become more selective about where they speak and who they share with. Because they talk with coworkers, they share in the group chat, they might vent over lunch or process their concerns in private. Communication is still happening. The question is why it feels safer, more useful, or more productive outside of the meeting instead of inside of it. And this is where conflict starts revealing culture. So, what is this conflict revealing? When people consistently avoid raising concerns in front of leadership, I become curious about what they've learned. Have they learned that disagreement is welcome? Or have they learned that disagreement leads to defensiveness? Maybe they remember a team member who was publicly embarrassed 6 months ago, and because it was never addressed, that incident sticks. Maybe team members have watched their concerns get dismissed over and over, so they give up on sharing. Maybe they've seen leaders respond well to feedback, but only when it's framed in a positive way or agreeing with what's already been said. And so team members assume that decisions are already made before meetings and don't feel like their input matters. Maybe they learn that speaking honestly carries risk and staying quiet carries very little. Maybe there are power dynamics at play, or maybe the conflict is revealing fear of retaliation or being labeled difficult. The point is, people's behavior usually makes sense within the context they're experiencing. People pay attention to when someone challenges an idea. They notice whose concerns get addressed or dismissed. They notice who gets protected. They notice who absorbs consequences when something goes wrong. And over time, people adjust their behavior accordingly. So before we assume solutions like people need better communication skills, we should ask what the culture has taught them about speaking up. A restorative lens shifts my attention away from fixing behavior towards understanding needs. Instead of asking, how do we get people to speak up? I become curious about what they would need in order to make that possible. Leaders do have legitimate needs for transparency, honest feedback, shared ownership, and accurate information, but that can't come at the cost of staff's needs for psychological safety, dignity, fairness, influence, and confidence that honesty won't be used against them. When those needs collide, silence often emerges as a safe enough strategy. From one perspective, what appears to be disengagement might actually be self-protection. Leaders are protecting their organization from making mistakes, and team members might be trying to protect themselves from consequences that they've seen before. When we look at those needs, the conversation is so much less about fixing people and more about what needs to change so people can participate honestly. If this situation sounds familiar, here are some questions I would sit with. What does your team perceive happens when someone raises a concern? What was the last time someone openly disagreed with leadership? And what happened after that? Whose ideas consistently shape decisions? Whose concerns primarily gain traction? Do people believe that their feedback influences outcomes? Or do they believe decisions have already been made? If I asked 10 of your team members whether it feels safe to speak honestly at work, what would they say? And more importantly, what evidence would they use to support their answer? Next time you're tempted to say, my team has a communication problem, pause and consider another possibility. What if their silence isn't the problem? What if it's a gift of information? Maybe it's telling you something about how people navigate power, fear, trust, and accountability, because conflict reveals culture. If this reflection brought a person, a team, or an organization to mind, send this to them. If you want more conversations like these, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts or on Substack to get it directly in your inbox. And if you're leading a team where conflict, mistrust, accountability challenges, or unresolved tension are affecting culture, you can learn more about my work at amplifyrj.com.